hopefully all y'all got a chance to get a good soak on the essay. Well, we got the Intentional Fallacy. I don't have them by W.K. Wimsatt Jr. and M.C. Beardsley. I had to get a little pause when I saw Beardsley and went, wait a minute, are we talking, how old is this article? Oh, no, not that Beardsley. And then come on back to it. I think it's a really great text, I find, for like discussing how artwork is interpreted, looking at a construct of what I call a hermeneutical interpretation. Geoffrey Casri, or Jay Casri, on your Zoom screen is going to do a brief introduction to kind of help set the stage for our discussion. Geoffrey Casri, can you introduce us to the text?
Thank you, Guy. Hi, everybody. I'm Jay Casri, and today we're going to use the essay, The Intentional Fallacy by Wimsatt and Beardsley, to talk about one of the most debated concepts in literary theory and criticism during the 20th century, authorial intent, or the intention of the author. This debate has been more or less active in literary theory, well, has been more active in literary theory than in visual theory, but it is completely applicable in both fields. So please, when I say author or reader, substitute it for the terms you prefer: artist, creator, viewer. We chose intentional fallacy because it was at the center of a transition when it comes to authorial intent and hermeneutics, that is, interpretation of a work of art. And this essay, with all its dryness and technicality, and let's face it, it's pretty dry. Despite this, the essay perfectly embodies the complex dialogue and discussions happening at the time. As you have read, it goes back and forth. There are replies, counter-arguments. It's in this essay, there are a lot of words, references to other texts. And this essay actually is one of the most influential in the field, according to several books of theory and criticism. And why? Well, to answer that, I would like to give a quick overview of how authorial intent has been theoretically seen in order to properly place this essay in its time, its moment, and also what came after. So the 20th century is the story of a shift in focus that went from the author, then to the work of art, and finally to the reader, viewer. So please keep in mind this movement from creator to the work to the receiver. That will also be useful to recognize where we are now. For 2,000 years, broadly speaking, it was assumed that texts and works of art were the product of their author's intention. This was heightened by the arrival of psychology, and for those who now have Freud in their minds, Freud uses a lot of literary examples in his works. And there is an embedded idea that through the psychoanalysis of the characters, we can get to a psychological understanding of the author. So we could even argue that a definition of intention needs to encompass not only conscious intention, but also unconscious motivations as well. But generally, critics and the general public assumed that the meaning of a text depended principally on the intention of the author, and that research into the author's life and works was necessary to reach that intention. What Wimsatt and Beardsley proposed with their essay was a simple statement. If authorial intentions have been successfully embodied in the work or text, then the work itself will give us all the information we needed. And they go further by stating in their first paragraph, and I quote, "The design or intention of the author is neither available nor desirable as a standard for judging the success of a work of literary art." Again, please substitute literary art for any work of art. For me, the key words here are not desirable. For them, the task of a critic is to examine the linguistic structure and its aesthetic unity as an autonomous object. This is one of the core principles of the school called the New Criticism, the movement to which Wimsatt and Beardsley belonged, and one of the main theoretical movements in the 1950s and early 60s, if not the main one, with its epicenter in the United States. Like all ideas, the notion of a work of art as an autonomous object was not new, and it is a continuation of Russian formalism with their view of a work of art as an artifact, where literary works resemble standalone machines. This approach, like the one taken by the new critics, strips the literary artifact from its connection with the author, reader, and historical background. For the new critics, the enemy, if there were any, is biographism, and also the romantic notion of an authorial God. And they wanted to introduce a more scientific method into hermeneutics. For them, if anything extrinsic to the work in relation to the author, the historical times, and so on, was relevant to interpret the work, then it would be in the work. This is, of course, extremely debatable, but I want to call attention to a moment in this essay where the authors talk about the key words of the intentional school, where the essay confronts two fields of words, having one side, sincerity, fidelity, spontaneity, authenticity, genuineness, originality, which belong to the intentional school, and places them against the preferred terms of integrity, relevance, unity, function, maturity, subtlety, adequacy. This change in language is the result of moving from a genius-type creation to a more scientific focus on the work as a construction. This essay is seminal in dethroning the author as the authority. And one might say, well, obviously the author might have some clue of what they were trying to do or say. Well, this is highly debatable. And if you ask me, as a good postmodernist that is not a fan of the new critics, I need to give it to them in this case and side with them. The new critics would say that first, the author's intention in the case of past texts cannot be known. So going down that route is a dead-end alley full of speculation that take us completely outside the text. But even if we could ask the author or the artist, their position is clear and quite amusingly expressed in the last line, where I quote, "Critical inquiries are not settled by consulting the oracle." And why? Because it is not in the text. Because today the author can say X and tomorrow he can say Y. Because the answer would not be really about the work of art. And we all know that you should never trust an artist when it comes to their work. So the new critic's position feels a little bit insufficient, in my opinion. So that's why the analysis of the new critics focused on the work itself, disregarding all outside elements, shifted in favor of a reader's response theory in the late 60s and 70s. At that moment, the dethroning of the author culminates in the author's death. And the death of the author gives birth to the era of the reader. So interpretation becomes an open quest, where a work is seen as part of a system establishing connections with itself, that is inside the work, and outside, to its time, to previous work, but also to future works, to films, to music, to general history, but also to personal histories. And who brings all this together is not the author, it's the viewer, the reader. It's the encounter between the work with the viewer or reader that becomes primordial. And doing so, the work becomes detached from a limiting interpretation given by the author in a specific moment, and the work is free to evolve and give light to new meanings as times change, as society evolves, as new works are added to the system. The new critics would say, no, they would be completely against this. As for them, the work of art should be judged according to itself, not based on its effects. And now we get to recent times. This intertextuality of mixing influences within a new political climate has allowed the idea of biographism to be re-evaluated in a very interesting way. In a world of identity politics, we ask from works a biographical authority from the creator that validates the contents of the work. So in a way, biography precedes the work, and the work can be seen as an extension of the author's biography. For good and bad, the introduction of identity politics has changed how we receive a work and how we create a work. So it's a transformation that affects all parts of the creator-work-receiver chain. So from today's point of view, it is fascinating to go back and historically see the evolution of hermeneutics from biographism to the new critics with only the work matters attitude, and to the reader's response where the author is not part of the equation and only the reception is the key act within an intertextual system. That is an interconnected system of text, images, meaning making. And it is also fascinating because if you ask most creators about if their intention matters, a lot will say, yes, of course it does, especially now. Others will say, no, it doesn't. So the answer is not simple. It is a complex one with a long history, where I believe everybody has made valid points, and the fact that their answers might go once against the other shouldn't be seen as contradictory, but as proof that a work of art forms part of a complex relational system that has always something new to say. And that something new to say, if I can be a little bit controversial, only occasionally is the author's intention. And that is the beauty of a work of art.
Thank you, Geoffrey.